So we have this thing in the Leningrad Codex, which is controversial, but you discover that in this other manuscript written by the same scribe, you have this unique feature, this unique linguistic variation. That's incredible. I mean, that was definitive proof, I think, along with all the other paratextual features, that you have this unique reading.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is huge. Shalom and welcome to Hebrew Voices. I am at Tyndall House in Cambridge, England, with Dr. Kim Phillips. Shalom, Kim.
Shalom, מה שלומך?
Beseda. Wow, you speak Hebrew. Now, Tyndall House is not a Jewish institution. What is Tyndall House?
Tyndale House is an evangelical research institute in the heart of Cambridge, where we focus on biblical studies. We have one of the world's leading biblical studies libraries, and scholars of any faith or none are welcome to come and work in our library. And we try to stock the leading stuff focusing just on biblical studies, and so by having that sort of fairly narrow focus, we can maintain the edge on keeping everything up to date.
So you're Dr. Kim Phillips. Tell us, what did you do your doctorate in?
I did most of my postgrad studies in the Book of Lamentations, but then when I came to my PhD, I had been reading Ibn Ezra and Kimchi and Rashi and the other medievals.
And those are medieval Jewish commentators.
They are medieval Jewish commentators, and I fell in love with them pretty much instantly. Wow. And so I ended up looking at Ibn Ezra's commentary on Isaiah 40 to 66.
Okay. Wow. So, and your PhD is from?
From Cambridge University.
Cambridge University. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And Tyndall House, is that part of Cambridge University? I'm a bit unclear on that.
Yeah, well, I think everybody is.
Okay. Because a lot of my audience, I think, will know of Tyndale House from the publishing.
Yes, Tyndale publishers are not Tyndale House.
Oh, they're not?
Cambridge, no relation at all. So Tyndale is, I think, technically an affiliated institution with the university. So so we have cam.ac.uk emails and whatnot, and certainly we're one of the main libraries that students, particularly postgrad students, will come and use.
And so you are a researcher at Tyndale House.
I am,
and you're also a researcher. Tell us about the other in the Cairo Geniza.
Yes, in the Taylor Schechter collection, which is the huge collection of Cairo Geniza manuscripts, which are stored in Cambridge University Library.
And that's the largest collection of Cairo Geniza fragments in the world at Cambridge.
By a country mile.
So you may not know this, but before I met you a few years back when I came to Cambridge to do some research. Yeah. But before I met you, you were one of my heroes. And I don't have a lot of heroes.
I didn't know that.
I don't have, I've like dealt with like, top sports athletes in the world and people who are pretty well known in media, and that doesn't mean anything to me, but you were a celebrity to me. And the reason you were a celebrity is...
I'm intrigued as to what you're about to
well,
say.
because you had famously discovered another manuscript by the same scribe who wrote the Leningrad Codex.
Yeah.
Leningrad Codex was completed around the year 1008. It's interesting why it's around, but that's a different discussion.
Yep.
And by a scribe named Samuel ben Jacob in Egypt. And that is the oldest complete manuscript that we know of currently of the entire Tanakh, of what Christians call the Old Testament. And it's the basis of modern printings, such as the BHS, which that's the BHS right here, isn't it?
Yep, here we are.
So that's like the standard Bible used in Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible used in seminaries and universities around the world. And so you found a second manuscript written by the same scribe, Samuel ben Jacob. Tell us how you did that. And at the time, it was an international story. It was, I think I read about it like in CNN and on Fox News.
So the one that got into the news was a manuscript of the former prophets. So Joshua through to 2 Kings.
But I have to stop you there for a second.
Okay. Yeah.
So you say 2 Kings and not 2 Kings?
I'm happy with that.
Do you know there's a whole controversy about this in the U.S.?
No.
The claim is that Christians say 1 Kings and 2 Kings.
Right.
And Jews say 1 Kings and 2 Kings.
Wow.
And when they asked Donald Trump what his favorite verse was, he said 1 Corinthians. And people pointed out, He's obviously never been to church, and he only knows about the names of the books from his Jewish son-in-law, and that's why he says 1 Corinthians and not First. But you just said 2 Kings, so I don't know if that vindicates the former American president or if it's relevant. But maybe it's a difference between Christians in America and Christians in the U.S. I don't know.
It seems like you guys have a lot of controversies that
over silly things
that don't make it over the pond.
So y'all would call this a what do you call it, storm in a teacup type of thing, but this was a big discussion of like, why doesn't he know it's called 1 Corinthians? He says it's 1 Corinthians. But anyway,
it's extraordinary.
Back to the former prophets. I get distracted easily.
So that was the manuscript. That,
and where was that manuscript?
So it's in the Phillips collection.
Okay.
And we'd known about it for centuries. You know, it's in the catalogues. But what we didn't know was that it was by Samuel ben Jacob, because there was no colophon to the effect.
So let me explain that. So if you have any old books in your house, you'll notice that often you're missing the beginning and the end. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I guess we're missing the end, which is normally where they write.
Yeah.
You know, in the Hebrew manuscripts, they would normally write at the end, it was completed on such and such a date by such and such a scribe. So we had this manuscript in St. Petersburg, Russia.
Yeah.
It's been known for over 150 years or so. Mm-hmm. And your discovery wasn't that the manuscript exists, but that it was written by the same scribe as Leningrad Codex.
That's right.
So how did you determine that? If it doesn't say in it who wrote it.
Yeah, sure. So here we actually need to go back to an earlier discovery that I made of 2 single leaves from the Taylor Schechter collection.
Okay.
Of
Exodus. Leaves is what most people would call pages.
Yeah. So if chas v'chalila, I would just rip this out, then it would be a
leaf. Right. So a leaf has what we would call 2 pages, but in common parlance, you found 2 pages that.
Yeah. Which of Exodus 25, 26, mm-hmm. and Leviticus 26, 27.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the day I was in the manuscripts reading room and I was poring over this beautiful leaf of the Exodus fragment as part of a mini project that we were doing on the Exodus Bible fragments. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that the little marks, the little sort of symbols at the end of the Masora Magna, were the same symbols that I'd seen in the facsimile of the Leningrad Codex.
So the Masora Magna are these notes at the bottom of the page, and so this is a sort of a decoration at the end of the line or something.
Yeah. So as you say, you've got the main text in 3 columns, and then you've got these Masoretic notes top and bottom of the page. And then to separate each of the individual notes, and at the end of the note in total, there was a colon and a circle and another colon.
Okay.
And I thought, I've seen that before. And so I checked in the facsimile of Leningrad, and then it was. Mm-hmm. And that got me thinking, wow, I wonder if there are other.
Because maybe everybody has that symbol.
Yeah, exactly. So I did a quick search of 100 or so different manuscripts which had these little symbols, mm-hmm. and it was fairly rare. I think there was only about 5 of the manuscripts which had that particular symbol. Other symbols are quite profuse, so just a circle or a dot or a little squiggly line. Or it's one of the. It mm-hmm. seems to be one of the very few areas where Jewish scribes who are copying out the Tanakh could show a tiny bit of individuality.
Well, that's a really good point. So pretty much everything they're copying, they've got to copy exactly as it is in the source.
Precisely.
But here they can express themselves with a little decoration or something.
That's right.
That's a really interesting point. Right. Yeah.
So Malachi Beit Aryeh has spent most of his career mm-hmm. Thinking about how you can identify scribes and link them mm-hmm. From their different manuscripts. And he talks about these paratextual features, a phrase he uses. And we're talking about things like how a scribe fills up the end of a line if he's trying to get some sort of left justification.
Mm-hmm. So paratextual is essentially anything that's not part of the content of the text.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're looking at these 2 fragments in the from the Cairo Geniza, and you identify these features that are these paratextual kind of decorations. Right. They're not part of the text.
That's right.
They're the place where the scribe can express himself.
Yes, exactly. So we're talking. So in addition to that little symbol at the end of the Masoretic notes, the way he fills up the line. So he, in his main biblical text, Samuel ben Jacob won't extend one of the letters, like a mem or a tav, for example, to fill up the line. Although he will do that in his writing of the Masoretic notes, for example.
Okay.
So
let me explain this to the audience. So when we justify a column today, we press the button on Word and it just does it, right? But what it really is doing is it's adding spaces between the words. One of the authentic ways of justifying a text in ancient Hebrew writings is to stretch out certain letters. Some people call it dilating letters. And so you're saying, and that's one way. Another way is you put in little line fillers.
Sure.
So you're saying he didn't stretch out letters in the biblical text, but he did in the Masoretic notes.
Yes, he does. Yeah, and he has a selection of letters that he'll use. So I isolated about a dozen of these paratextual features from the Leningrad Codex, predominantly from the Leningrad Codex, and they were all the same in this fragment that I was looking at of Exodus. And so I began to get very, very excited. And then I started reading the Masoretic notes in more detail for their content on this fragment. And this might take us a bit off-piste, but
no, please.
They were identical letter for letter to the Masoretic notes in another manuscript that we know Samuel ben Jacob wrote, and it's called LM, but which we only have access to via a publication of the Masora Magna. We don't have the actual manuscript, sadly.
Someone does. It's just not available to the public.
Someone does, yes. And if you're watching, please, we really
we just want photos at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
High resolution color photos.
That would be ideal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have access at least to the Masoretic to the.
So in other words, somebody transcribed what was in it, but we don't have the actual document itself because it's in a safe somewhere,
yeah,
that we won't talk about.
So they didn't transcribe the biblical text, only the text of the Masoretic notes from the top and bottom of the page, not even the Masora Parva, as it's so called, in between the columns.
Okay. And how would you describe the Masora? I describe it as like proofreading notes.
Okay.
Would you say that's
a beautiful illustration, or comparison? I normally say it's like scaffolding around the outside of a heritage building that you want to preserve, and so you put the scaffolding there with all sorts of safeguards so that the heritage building doesn't get damaged in any way.
And I call them proofreading notes because they're, I'm telling the audience, there are these little notes that will say, a certain word is spelled this way 3 times, this other way 2 times, and here's what the 3 times are. And so you're saying they were, and there's many different ways to express that. So if they're verbatim the same in the Leningrad Codex and in these 2 fragments of Exodus, or one of the fragments of Exodus, that seems either that one was copied from the other, or they were both written by the same scribe. Seems to be the options there.
Yes, yeah. So it was LM, not the Leningrad Codex.
LM. Okay. But we know that Samuel ben Jacob wrote that one.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks to a colophon.
So up till now we have 3 manuscripts written by Samuel ben Jacob: Leningrad Codex, LM, and these Chirogeniza fragments. And we're going to get to the 4th one because that's
we have 4 already, in fact, because there's another manuscript in Phillips collection, which is a Torah with Saadia's tafsir. So
it's interspersed with his with an Arabic translation.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. Good.
All right. So you discover your big discovery is the 5th one.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, my discovery is getting smaller and smaller.
No, but it's important because in the case of what you call LM, we don't actually have the manuscript. We have somebody's transcription of the manuscript from the 20th century or early 21st century or whatever. Or parts of it even. And then in the other case, we have, it's verses interspersed with an Arabic translation.
Yeah.
And you have actually a block of text, which is, like you said, Joshua through 2 Kings. Right?
Yeah. Which one am I meant to say? 2 Kings, 2 Kings?
No, it's fine.
I'm feeling the pressure.
So how did you determine that? All right. So you identified these 2 fragments as being from Samuel ben Jacob by comparing it to LM.
Yeah. And Leningrad. Yeah.
And Leningrad. But with LM, you didn't have the you didn't have the like the graphic decorations.
Yes.
Because you don't have it.
Yeah.
You just have a transcription.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's interesting. Wow, that would be so. Now we really need to see LM to see what the graphic decorations are in there.
Yeah. In fact, I'm remembering now, because this was a while ago. In Yevin's book on the Aleppo Codex, there is a picture, I think, of one leaf of LM.
Oh, there is.
I think.
Okay.
And I think that you have that same circle colon thing there. So I think that was part of the story. So
it's been a while, huh?
Okay. Yeah, it has been.
All right.
But anyway, so the point really is, I mean, yes, it is nice to have a big chunk of text that we know is written by him, and in particular, it can enable us to clarify certain oddities in the Leningrad Codex. But perhaps we'll come back to that. But the real, as far as I'm concerned, the most exciting thing was realizing actually there is a way, apart from having a colophon, that you can begin to say, okay, this scribe that I know must have also written this manuscript, which up to now I didn't know was written by him. That is possible. And when you work in the Karaganiza, where basically you're working with a page here, 2 pages here, a scrap of a page here, that's
a
quite
lot of
handy.
Scraps of a lot of pages.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's what I meant by it was the potential that I think was more exciting.
I can't emphasize what a big deal that is. That you can look at a manuscript that was written 1,000 years ago. At this point, actually more than 1,000 years ago, slightly more.
Yeah.
And you can say, not only can I date this, but I know the name of the scribe. That's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, how often can one do that in the history of let's say of Hebrew textual studies? And there are cases, right? Like there's a whole bunch of manuscripts they say were written by this, Rabbi Joseph Rosh Haseder, right? And people know his handwriting, right?
Sure.
Yeah. That's pretty rare. And what makes it more difficult, I think, is in biblical texts, they're writing in this kind of square formal hand, right?
Precisely.
So, well, they all kind of look the same.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So we've got lots of Maimonides fragments in the Geniza, and he has rather distinctive handwriting. He's got a doctor's handwriting.
So that's when he's writing in either cursive or semi-cursive.
Yes.
If he's writing in the proper square script and he's copying something, so he's not even like in a hurry, well, maybe he is in a hurry, but
he must have always been in a hurry. But
This actually happened to me when I was working on my PhD, and I brought a fragment to, a codex to Edna Engel, who is a disciple of Malachi Beit Aryeh and one of the top paleographers in the world in Hebrew.
Yeah.
And I asked her to date it, and she said, not only can I tell you when it's from, I could tell you the name of the scribe. Wow. And I'm like, what? How is that possible? Wow. But that's basically what you did.
Yeah.
Not basically, that's exactly what you did.
Yeah, and Samuel
that's amazing. That's why you're one of my heroes.
Right, thank you. Well,
when I grow up, I want to be him.
Dear. You need to aim higher. Samuel ben Jacob's a particularly lovely case because, thanks to the sort of the miracle that is the Cairo Geniza, we have other documents written by him. We have a letter written by him when he first arrived in Fustat. Yeah. Okay. We've got.
What does he say in the letter?
Well, it's broken off as all the Cairo Geniza fragments are just where you want it. But basically, it seems to say, I'm new here and I'm poor, so please could you help me get on my feet?
Okay.
But then we have a document written a few years later, written in 1021, actually, we have the date for that one, where he is agreeing to copy a Bible text.
Oh, wow.
For 25 dinars, a massive sum of money, and sort of way over the odds for Bible codices at the time. So, and we've got his signature, for example. I think in a gate.
That's a divorce document.
Yeah, that's right. And
was he a witness there, or was he getting divorced?
He was a witness. Yeah, he was a witness.
Yeah, okay.
And in one other place as well, I think. So we don't just get his professional work, as it were. We also have if I remember, a liturgical text written in his hand.
Okay. So he didn't just produce Bibles; he was producing a prayer book or something.
Apparently, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we can really sort of develop a bit of a rounded character for him. So
that's really interesting. So in some ways, maybe we know more about him. And this part's maybe a bit controversial, but it seems like we know more about him than we do about Aharon ben Asher, who wrote, who was the proofreader and pointer of the Aleppo Codex.
Sure.
because we have a tome that he wrote, but which parts of it he actually wrote are a matter of some controversy, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, certainly in terms of the sort of sits im Leben, as it were, the actual real world in which the person lived. We know much more about Samuel ben Jacob
Right. Well, that's interesting.
than Aaron
Okay.
Shea. So
wow, that's fascinating. So, how did you then? So you're looking at this Codex of the Prophets, of the former prophets, and you start to notice these same sorts of paratextual symbols as in the Leningrad Codex.
Yeah, that's right. And obviously, when you've got more text, then you can do more checks. And so this manuscript, L17, unimaginatively called.
Is that what Yevin calls it?
That's
or?
what, yeah.
Okay.
So Yevin has a list of manuscripts that he thinks are significant from the Firkovich collection, and this was number 17. And it's a substantial text, and so we had a lot more, and including a couple of places where, and this actually comes back to something I mentioned earlier, there are places in the Leningrad Codex where Samuel ben Jacob diverges from what one would expect based, say, on the Aleppo Codex. In absolute minutiae, the smallest of small points, but nonetheless, it's a divergence. And the question is always, did he just get it wrong, or is this deliberate? Is there some tradition that he's proposing as an alternative? So one sort of the classic case is the name of the Yerachmelites in was it 1 Samuel 30:31, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah, I'll look it up. But it's actually twice.
That's right. Yeah.
I can't even say it.
That's right. That's exactly the problem.
And the problem is that it's 3 shvas in a row, which doesn't exist in according to the rules of Hebrew. Yes. Don't you love it when there's something in a manuscript that doesn't exist in the language? Right. and that's actually a really interesting point, because we think of grammars as prescriptive, right? The grammar tells you how to speak and how to write.
Yeah.
But actually, a grammar of even of modern languages to some extent, but definitely of an ancient language, is descriptive.
Sure.
And if the rule is, well, you never have 3 shvas in a row, and we find in one of the most important manuscripts of the Bible 3 shvas in a row, well then, then there's a different set of rules he's following.
Sure.
So what did you find? So it's in 1 Samuel 27:10. It says Achish would ask, "Where did you raid today?" And David would reply, "The Negev of Judah, and the Negev of the Yerachmelites, or the Negev of the Canaanites." And in the I'm looking here at Accordance, which uses based on same text as BHS.
Yeah.
It has I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Hayachem Eli, right? So if you have 3 shvas in a row, and then of course if it's in Tiberian pronunciation, it would be Hayachamal Eli. I don't know.
Exactly.
We don't know.
What do we do with it?
And then in 1 Samuel 30 verse 29, it has what we would expect, Hayarachma Eli, where there's a shva, a patach, and then 2 shvas, which is perfectly fine.
That's right.
All right. So,
however, in that latter case, that's been changed. It was originally.
How do you know that?
Because if you just zoom in, you can see really clearly.
So I actually photographed that with a microscope.
Oh, here we go. Come on,
at Ben's request.
Yeah.
And you can not only see it's been changed,
right?
You can see that it was originally a shva.
Yeah, great.
Like without question, when you zoom in that closely.
Wow.
With the microscope.
So people have been having this discussion for a long time. How can you possibly have 3 shvas?
Well, and people debated that case in 1 Samuel 30:29, where it does follow the rules about whether was it changed or was it not changed. And so I was asked to check it when I was in St. Petersburg 3 years ago, and definitively it's been changed.
Brilliant.
So in 2 places it originally had the 3 shvas in a row. So what did you have in? Now you got me excited. What did you have in L17, also written by Samuel ben Jacob?
3 shvas in a row.
So it's not just a fluke.
It is not a fluke. Okay. He is being deliberate. He wanted those 3 shvas.
Okay. So what that tells us is here we have an authentic textual variant that's deliberate. And you could always say, well, one of those goes back to an error, possibly, or although maybe they both go back to 2 different reading traditions, right? We had these people who were, I guess, professional readers who would learn how to read the scriptures, and then the Masoretes wrote down That's the standard explanation. And that actually will bring us to our next topic, which we'll talk about in the next episode, which is really exciting because one of your other field of expertise is what's called the Land of Israel pointing system.
Yeah, that's right.
That is, what the Hebrew that most people know about is actually Tiberian Hebrew.
Yes.
And there's actually 3 different major Hebrew pronunciation traditions from,
that's right.
I want to say ancient times or from
ancient times.
Okay.
Definitely.
And you're actually one of the world's foremost experts on the so-called Palestinian or Eretz Yisraeli, the Land of Israel system.
That's right.
So join us for the next episode.
Great.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.